Every night, as I drove home from work, I could feel something pulling me to exit off the highway at exit 43. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the exit. From the highway, I could see a few gas stations, some chain restaurants, and a small mall that was now closed for the evening. One night, as I was driving home, I gave in to the pull and exited the highway. As I came to a stop at the end of the ramp, I was drawn to turn right, so I turned to see where it would lead. I must be going crazy, I thought, choosing not to resist. As I turned, I found myself having a sense that I knew where I was going, though I wasn't familiar with the area. I could only remember pulling off this exit to get gas a few times, but I never ventured any further than there. I continued to drive down the road, waiting for another feeling, sign, or something to tell me what to do next. Not knowing where I was supposed to be going, I continued further along the road as it led me away from the gas stations, chain stores, and restaurants. After about 10 minutes of driving and not feeling a sense of where to go, I decided this adventure was silly. I was about to turn into a vacant gas station to head back to the highway when the pool came back, whispering for me to continue. A short distance up the road, no longer lit by street lights, I found myself on a country road, void of other travelers. Then I saw a long driveway that I was pulled to turn into. I berated myself as I turned and followed the driveway. This is crazy, I thought. I should be on my way home to my wife and kids, not driving up some stranger's driveway. Even knowing that I was probably trespassing, and sure whomever lived at the end of the driveway wouldn't be happy that a car was pulling up to their house at 12 in the morning, I couldn't stop myself. I drove up to the house, only to find that it was old and falling apart. The grass hadn't been cut in what seemed a year. There were no lights on, and the house looked to be on the verge of collapsing in on itself. I pulled up to the house and turned off my car's lights. I left my car running, not sure if I should continue. One moment, I was sitting in my car indecisive, and the next, I was standing in front of the door. I began to panic. I had never blacked out before, but without realizing it or remembering it, I had gotten out of the car and walked up to the entrance to this decaying house. I turned and saw that my car was still sitting there where I had parked it, though it was no longer running. I felt for the keys and found them in my coat pocket. All of a sudden, I felt a strong pull to enter the house. I was about to enter when I hesitated. I realized that the house was hidden from the main road, and if I entered, no one would know I was there if I ran into any trouble. I felt like someone or something was calling out to me, and I felt I needed to hear what the message was. I turned the knob and walked through the rabbit hole. The door creaked as I closed it behind me. I was surprised to see that there was still furniture filling each room. It was as if the occupants just vanished, leaving the house intact and everything they owned behind. A layer of dust covered everything. It seemed as if the house had been vacant for a very long time. I stood silent, straining my ears, trying to detect movement. Nothing. After standing by the front door for a few moments, I began to walk around the first floor, looking for anything out of the ordinary, anything that would give me a clue as to what had pulled me here. I found nothing on the first floor, except a house frozen in time, slowly turning to dust. Each stair creaked as I made my way to the second floor. The second floor consisted of one hallway with two doors on either side. I had noticed some pictures downstairs scattered around the different rooms, and I had even strained to see who the people may have been that used to live in this house. I couldn't get over how strange it was that this house stood not only full of furniture, but family pictures scattered around, as if everyone had one day vanished and no one else had noticed. Stopping in front of one of the pictures upstairs, I realized that the pictures upstairs were different from the ones downstairs. The downstairs pictures seemed more recent, maybe 20 years old, based on the clothes they were wearing and the cars that were caught in the background. The upstairs pictures were much older. They looked to be farmers. One picture was of a family sitting on an old wagon with a single horse to pull it. I thought it was strange that the pictures were grouped differently on each floor. It was as if two separate families had lived in this house. That was always a possibility, but I got the sense that they were a part of the same family. Instead of intermixing the pictures, they seemed to have been separated by generation. I decided to take a look in the first room on the right to see what was there. When I walked in, my eyes widened when I noticed that the entire room was dust-free and the main light was on. How did I miss the light when I pulled up, I asked myself. The room I was in was at the front of the house, so I should have noticed the light when I pulled up. As I moved further into the room and began to look around, the door suddenly closed behind me. The slammed door startled me, and I quickly walked back to the door to make sure I wasn't locked in the room. To my pleasant surprise, it wasn't locked, and I was able to open the door with ease. But before I completely relaxed, my heart jumped again as I noticed the hallway was brightly lit by the sunlight coming through the windows at either end of the hallway. I had pulled off the highway around midnight. Drive to the house was about 20 minutes, and I knew I hadn't been in the house more than 20 to 30 minutes. There was no way the sun could be out right now, so I ran to one of the windows to see if something else was making the light. My heart was racing as I was able to see the sun up in the sky. Somehow, it was suddenly daytime. As I ran down the hallway, then down the stairs, I took notice that the furniture was now clean and there was no dust on any of it. Panic set in once again once I got to the front door and I couldn't open it. I pulled my cell phone out to call my wife and to get help, but when I looked at my phone, there was no service. My head was spinning as reality slowly started to dawn on me. It was now day. The furniture seemed new and dust-free, and I seemed to be locked in. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I knew I was in trouble. I quickly ran to the back door, but something inside me told me that it would be locked as well. It was. I ran up to all the windows, one by one, but they were immovable, as if they were nailed down with invisible nails. Outside, the lawn was neatly cut and green. I was about to start breaking glass to get out when I heard a sound coming from upstairs. It sounded like two people wrestling when all of a sudden I heard a scream. I ran up the stairs to see what was happening. The door of the room I had been in was closed, but the room at the end of the hallway on the right was now open. That has to be where the sound came from, I thought. What awaited me when I entered the room would forever be ingrained in my memory. On the bed lay a bloody corpse. The face had been crushed by something, but by the dress she was wearing, I was pretty sure it was the old woman from the pictures in the hallway. I whirled around looking for the attacker, but saw none. Only the body was left in the room. I wanted to run back downstairs and kick down the door, but instead I searched the room for a weapon. The only weapon I could find was a pair of scissors. After I picked it up, I went to the window to see if I could get out that way. The window was the same as the ones on the first floor, immovable. Walking scissors first, I exited the room and continued to search for a way out, afraid that at any time someone would jump out and try to kill me. I jumped when the door to the room I just walked out of slammed shut. I don't know why, but I walked back to the room and tried to open the door. It would not open. Even when I kicked it as hard as I could, it felt like there was now a large concrete wall behind it. I was about to break down crying when I heard a large crash downstairs. Still afraid, I ran down the stairs to see what was happening. Part of me just wanted to hide, but a larger part of me needed to know what was going on. I ran through the living room towards the kitchen where I believe the sound came from. When I ran into the kitchen, there lay another body on the floor, chest crushed and blood everywhere. There was blood on the floor, the cabinets, and the walls. It was as if the chest had been crushed with something huge and the person had exploded from the force. I stopped at the entrance because there was too much blood to enter the room. I stood there baffled, trying to piece together what was happening. There has to be a reason I'm here, I thought. I just hoped it wasn't to die. I felt like a ghost witnessing the horrible acts that had been committed in this house, but I had yet to see the killer or learn why these people were killed. I started to think that maybe if I could solve what was going on, that could be the way out of the house. Without entering, I looked around the kitchen to see if there were any clues. I saw pictures on the refrigerator, along with magnets from various businesses. On the wall was a calendar, so I studied it. The month was July, and the year was 1983. Whoever lived here was not marking off the calendar as the days went, so I couldn't tell what day it was supposed to be. I continued my scan of the room, but saw nothing else useful. I turned, walked to the living room, and began studying each of the pictures. Most were family pictures. I saw the woman that was lying on the kitchen floor, who must have been her husband and the kids. One picture was of them on a snowy mountain, one was of them in a park, and another was a professionally taken family picture. Something was tugging in my mind about the pictures, but I couldn't place it. I turned and began to walk away. I wanted to investigate some of the other rooms. I decided to take one more look at the body in the kitchen. I felt I needed to give her a moment of respect before I left her lying there in a pool of blood. But when I turned to look, her body was gone, as was all the blood. The kitchen had returned to the state that showed no sign of an attack, but in the place where her body had been lying stood a man of at least 7 feet, holding a comically huge hammer. The hammer looked like the kind you would find in an amusement park, the kind you would swing as hard as you could to ring the bell and get a prize, but instead it looked like this behemoth was using it to crush people. We stood there staring at each other for a moment. Before he could charge, I turned and began to run upstairs. I didn't hear him behind me, but I wasn't venturing to look to see if he was there. I ran up the stairs and began trying each of the doors. The first one on the right that I had first entered was blocked and would not open. The first door on the left turned and opened. I ran in and quickly closed the door. I went to the side of a dresser that was standing by the door. I stood in front of the door to block it. I didn't think it would hold, but I didn't know what else to do. While I waited for the giant to crash through the door, I went to the window and began banging on it, trying to escape. No matter how hard I hit it, it would not break or even crack. Outside, I saw an old wagon pull up and an old man get out. I began to bang on the window to get his attention, but the old man didn't seem to notice me. Instead, the man casually made his way to the back door. Half driven to warn him, half driven for an ally, I pushed the dresser back to where it had been and slowly opened the door. Nothing waited for me on the other side. I slowly made my way down the hallway, still clutching the scissors. I made my way down the stairs, expecting the giant to be waiting for me around every corner, but I didn't see him. As I approached the kitchen, watching for both the giant and the old man, I glanced out the window to where the wagon should have been, and realized it was gone. Forgetting about getting to the back door to meet the old man, I ran to the closest window and looked out, searching for the wagon. It was nowhere in sight. I realized I was once again alone, so I turned my attention back to finding a way out and not run into the giant again. I made my way to the study, a room I had passed several times. It was at the bottom of the stairs on the other side of the front door. It was full of papers, so I hoped it would have some clues. Once I was in the study, I began to look around, keeping the scissors at the ready. On the desk, I found more family pictures of them in different locations. As I studied the papers on the desk, a newspaper caught my eye. It was an old issue. The date was labeled June 30th, 1943. It was an article of an entire family being slaughtered on the old Ferguson farm. The article included a picture of the family, and I recognized the woman from upstairs. I thought for a moment that the fact that the woman's body from upstairs was from the murder in 1943, and the calendar in the kitchen had the year 1983. I also realized that the months were the same. The article went on to say that there were 4 bodies found, and due to the amount of blood in all of their rooms, it was obvious something terrible had happened. They stated that it looked like the mother was murdered in her bedroom, the children in their bedroom, while the father's body was found in the study downstairs. I looked around the room to see if I could find any trace of where the body may have been, but I couldn't. I knew I was in the right house, but they must have done a great job of cleaning up before they put the house back on the market. When I was up in the first room, where the kids must have slept, I didn't see any bodies, but then I remembered there had been 4 rooms, and I had only been in 3. I decided in that moment I didn't want to enter that 4th room. I walked from the study to the living room and nearly wet myself as I saw another horrific sight. A man's body had been impaled into the wall with enough force that he was partly in the wall, with the rest of his body hanging like a deer head over a fireplace. I began walking away backwards slowly when I bumped into something. When I turned, I was looking into the eyes of the giant man with a giant hammer. Without thinking, I stabbed him multiple times, but when I saw he was still not about to attack, I pulled the scissors out one more time and pushed him as hard as I could. He fell backward into a love seat, and I ran past him towards the front door to try it again. I still had no luck opening it. I was unsure which way to run, but I knew I had to keep moving. I ran around the corner through the study, down a short hallway, ready to run into the kitchen and grab a better weapon, when I glanced out the window and saw a truck sitting out there with an old man getting something out of the truck bed. I looked over my shoulder to see if the giant was following me, but I didn't see any sign of him. I went to the window and began to bang on it. This time the old man seemed to notice and gave me a quizzical look. I couldn't be sure, but this old man looked just like the other old man I saw getting off the wagon when I was upstairs. He started walking towards the back door, so I went there to meet him. But when I was about to head into the kitchen, it was once again covered in blood, and the woman's body laid on the floor once more. The old man was staring at me through the back door glass. Then he turned to look at something off to the side. I quickly turned my gaze and once again saw the giant man on the other side of the dining room making his way to the other kitchen door toward me. He still had blood stained on his front, but he didn't seem to be injured anymore. I turned and ran to the back door, sliding on the blood as I reached it. Once again, the door seemed impossible to open, and I yelled for the old man to open it for me, but instead of helping, a smile grew across his face. It was at that moment I realized that he was not going to help, and the door wasn't going to open. There was a brief moment when I thought of just lying down and letting the giant kill me, but the thought of my family drove me to continue. There had to be a way out of this house. As the giant man entered the kitchen, I ran out the other door, ran down the hallway, through the study, and ran back up the stairs. I once again began trying every door, but none of them were opening. Something inside of me told me when I got to the last room, the door would open, and I knew what I would see inside. The last door did open, and I did see what I expected to. 2 children lay in each of their beds, bodies just as destroyed as the other bodies I had seen. I recognized the kids from the pictures that were upstairs and the family picture in the article I had seen in the study. It was at that moment that I realized that somehow I was jumping between 2 time periods. Upstairs, it was June 30th, 1943, and downstairs was June 30th, 1983. Upstairs, the bodies of the mother and kids were laying where they had been slain, and downstairs, the other mother and father, where they must have been slain in 1983. I realized that's why I didn't see the kids from the downstairs family up here, and why I didn't see the body of the upstairs father downstairs. Now all I had to do was figure out why I was here and how I was going to get out. There must be a part of the house that was connected to my time. All I had to do was find it. The old man was in both time periods, as with the giant. I couldn't figure out how that was possible, but I now knew the old man and the giant must be partners. I tried the windows in the bedroom, knowing they wouldn't budge, and they didn't. Then it dawned on me. I didn't see a door that went to the basement, but this house did seem to have an attic. I began looking up and scanning the bedroom, but didn't see an opening. I knew it was unlikely there would be an entrance in this room. More than likely it was in the hallway, so I ran to the door and into the hallway. Once in the hallway, I found the opening, and right under the opening, there was the giant and the old man. I was torn between confronting them to make it to the attic and running back into the room and barricading the door. I chose the latter. There was no way I was going to get to that opening with a straight-on assault. I ran into the room and slammed the door. I waited for them to start kicking down the door, but they never did. I was paralyzed with indecision. I turned to look for a way to tear through the ceiling and was about to climb on the bed with the bodies when I turned, and there was the giant and the old man staring at me. I backed up slowly and moved the chair I had pinned against the door. Walking backward, I opened the door and walked back into the hallway. When I turned to see if the hallway was clear, I found that it was. I looked back at the 2 men and kept an eye on them as I walked into the hallway. They began to follow, walking as slowly as I was. I continued to walk backward all the way to the entrance to the attic, and still looking at them, I reached up, found the string, and pulled. The 2 men just stared at me as I pulled the ladder down and began to climb up. "Who are you?" I asked, once I knew it was too far up for them to reach me before I could climb the rest of the way up. They just stood there staring back at me. As I climbed up, I kept my eyes on them as long as I could, and then I was up in the attic. I looked down to see if they were going to follow me, but they never appeared. I saw a wooden window at the far end of the attic and went to see if I could escape that way. I looked out the window and saw my car, sitting there where I had left it. I broke one of the boards off the window to see if I could, and once I realized I could, I frantically broke off the rest. Once I had broken off enough to squeeze through, I looked back one more time and seeing nothing, climbed out the window. I was still pretty high, but I didn't care. Hanging out the ledge, I let go and dropped, hitting the ground hard. I lay there, catching my breath, and once I was sure I would be able to stand, I got up and limped to the car. When the engine turned, I breathed a sigh of relief and risked a look at the house. It had returned to a state of decay, the grass was unkept, and there were now no lights on. I backed the car up and turned around. As I drove off, I glanced down at the clock and almost had a heart attack when I saw that I had only been gone 20 minutes. I raced down the driveway and began to drive home as fast as I could, looking to my rearview mirror periodically to ensure no one was chasing me. I'd never been so relieved to make it home. I got out of the car, my body aching, but I didn't care. I knew my wife and kids would be asleep. It was after midnight. I went into the house with a goal of drinking myself to sleep. Tomorrow I would have to research what had happened at that house and why I had been drawn there. What the neighbors couldn't see, and what I didn't see, was that I didn't come home alone. In the back seat of my car sat a smiling old man and a giant with a giant hammer. They were finally free.